Start while I work out my technical issues. Right, good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Clara Finnemore. I'm the Journals and E-Resources Librarian at the Royal College of Art, and I'm also the chair of the ARLIS Serials Committee. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on housekeeping and intro before we kick off with our presentations this morning. And I'm chairing this morning with my committee colleague, Miglena, who's going to help out when we get to the questions. So, hi. So you'll notice that we are recording. That is just for the presentation. So we will finish recording. Oh, hold on, I'm just going to let some people in. We will finish recording at the end of the presentations before we have our discussion and questions. So just a couple of minutes just to tell you about who ARLIS are, if you're not aware. So, okay, so ARLIS is the UK and Ireland Art Library Society. So what ARLIS exists to do is to support the profession, so fostering engagement with an understanding of the work of art librarians, sorry, I'm just still admitting people, to share best practice through events like this one, and we have an annual conference and we have several committees organising events, so there's lots of things going on for sharing best practice. We have a journal called the Art Libraries Journal, which enables us to facilitate academic discourse. And also we foster equity. We're a committed anti-racist and inclusive organisation. So in terms of membership, some of you may already be either personal or institutional members of ARLIS. If you're not already a member, here are some of the benefits of membership. So it allows you to join a network of professionals. You would qualify for member discounts for some of the events and activities that we run. Would enable you to volunteer for one of the committees or the conference working party. And also we have some grants that are available just to members. And all that information and much more is available on the website arlis.net. So I'll just pop that there as well. Okay, here's our agenda for this morning. So in just a moment, I'm going to hand over to Ben for our first presentation. As I mentioned, we're doing the presentations all at the beginning, and then we'll stop the recording and take the questions related to each of those presentations and then have a wider discussion. I think some of our speakers also have questions for you. So and then we have left plenty of time for that, and then we will, if we're still going towards 1 o'clock, then we'll wrap up towards 1 o'clock. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand over to Ben. Whenever you're ready, Ben. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see this. I'm just going to start a timer so I don't ramble on too much. Hi, good morning. So I have changed the title very slightly, but I'm going to give a brief history of cataloging with a focus on serials cataloging, and hopefully set this day up in a bit of context so we can then go on to talk about the present and the future later on. So firstly, I'm going to just briefly think about what a catalogue is and what it's capable of. Then I'm going to show you a ridiculous table I made called Serial Spacetime, which is an attempt to sort of map out the different types of standards that have existed over time. You'll see. Before then considering 3 specific examples of standards and an example for each type of standard, if that makes sense. So that would be firstly thinking about principles and ethics, which I'm saying is like the why are we doing this? Secondly, conceptual models, which is kind of what things are we interested in, and finally, rules or content standards, which is how do we actually make a catalog. So, what is a catalog? So catalogs have existed in various forms for as long as there's been kind of writing of any kind. Um, since the invention of the printing press, the catalog became something that could allow the reader entry into a broader possible world of even more books than they might have been lucky enough to amass themselves. Um, the French word bibliothèque was used to mean a collection or compilation of texts, as well as a physical library, as far back as the 16th century. So there's always been this kind of dual understanding of a library and a catalogue. The first modern catalogue we'll go on to discuss later from 1841, the British Library. And that was a printed catalogue in 1841, but it also existed as a manuscript catalogue for 40 years after its first publication. Obviously, we then later had cards in the 20th century and kind of opaques now. And so I'm just kind of highlighting here that the form the catalogue has taken has always gone on to influence the standards applied to its development. Secondly, I think we can think about how we talk and think about cataloging has changed. So initially from lists of books, either by an author or in one place, then we might think about entries in a physical catalog, which is what the 41 rules are about. Sorry, the 91 rules, which we'll discuss later, are about. Then we might think about records. So that would be like records on cards, or now we think about marked records. And finally, I would say we're now in a kind of world where we're thinking about data. So we're thinking about discrete bits of information that are related to each other beyond creation of records themselves. So all of this is to say that metadata, as we might call it now, has changed a lot over time, but it's kind of maybe consistently been able to do certain things, and I've listed some here. So this is just to encourage us to think about these things in a kind of broad sense beyond just describing or listing. So here, yeah, we're thinking about description is obviously one aspect. But then we can think about how catalogs can allow resources to be found by criteria, they can aggregate, they can provide pathways, they can facilitate exchange and interoperability, they can provide identification for thinking about things like preservation. And then I've just got a little image here of Lux, which if you haven't used it before is an incredible catalog which transcends many, many different types of resources, and I think is amongst the best out there at the moment in my mind. So here's the table. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight here basically that there's different axes that we can think about cataloging standards. So we can think about them how they've changed over time, but we can also think about them kind of in terms of fulfilling different roles and different functions. So I think we can also think that, like, we maybe think that we live at a particular moment in which like everything's changing and kind of we're having to deal with a lot of difficult kind of new ways of thinking. But I think that there's a large extent to which this has always been true, and there's always been debates about how, basically how we do any of this work. There's been arguments, there's been resistance, there's been things taken up or not. And so there's also been moves where things have come together, split apart. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of give this overview here. There's not many, thinking more about serials, there's not many standards that have been specific to serials. But just to highlight a couple on this list. So there's the ISBD-S, which then became the ISBD-CR, continuing resource, and then also PRESU, which I'll go on to discuss later. But there is an aspect or an element of thinking about aggregates, continuing resources, diachronic work, serials, periodicals, etc. in many of these different standards and rules, all of which you can find more information about on the internet. So yeah, but here I'm now just going to briefly discuss a few. So initially, I'm just going to discuss the Paris principles, which later became the International Cataloguing Principles. So these were arguably the first writing down of some of the explicit principles for the construction of a catalogue, which was meant to go on to influence the future development of standards, other standards effectively. So these were meant to be super high level ways of understanding what the purpose of doing any of this work was. So the group who kind of did this work was international in makeup, but still predominantly Anglo-American. The focus in the Paris Principles was on entry. So this was the way, as this is the way in which catalogues were organized at the time. So in terms of main entries and added entries. Those of you who catalogue now may be aware of these terms as they persist in Mark, despite most systems now indexing more comprehensively and also most searching being keyword. But this is still a way in which we kind of, despite this being 70 years ago, this is still a way in which we think about and talk about cataloging. So yeah, the purpose of the catalogue in the Paris Principles was made explicit in that it should be an instrument for ascertaining information about a collection. So whether or not a library contains certain books by title, by author. For serials specifically, it was an intervention into a long-running, still maybe rumbling on debate on two major fronts. So firstly, was what to do with changes in title, and secondly was to do with corporate authors. So these are two little snapshots from the top one's from the Paris Principles, and the second one's actually from the International Cataloguing Principles, which is like a re-articulation. So as you can see with the first one there, it talks about how serial publications should be entered if issued, about should be entered successively under different entries. So that's what's called successive entry. So effectively a new entry is made for each new title. And it further restricted the cases when a corporate body is considered an author. Obviously, we can talk more about these specifics, but just to say this is the type of level at which these types of things were intervening. So the ICP, which is later, put the user more at the center of this whole thing, and kind of considered the function of a catalogue slightly more broadly. It was less prescriptive than the Paris Principles, and it related to other standards that had existed that kind of come into action by 2016. But yeah, so these are the principles, and then we can think about conceptual models. So the models that we currently have are, the main one is the library resource model, and also the library resource model object-oriented, which has just come out. But before that, there are a number of other models that influence the library resource model. These were predominantly the what are called the Ferber family, so the functional requirement models. So the need for formal models came out of the attempt to rework AACR2 for the 21st century. So it was realized that it would help if there were some more formal conceptual underpinnings to this work, which was at that point going to be called AACR3. It's birthed many models which have come together into the LRM. But the only one that's kind of specifically designated to try and conceptualize serials is called Press Object-Oriented, or PRESU. And so that's what's called an object-oriented model, as opposed to an entity relationship model, which you might be more familiar with. The difference is definitely more complex than I probably understand, but the way in which I've always thought about it is that basically entity relationship models are about the material itself and what it consists of, whereas object-oriented models are also about how material interacts. So they have a concept of time, which is what arguably is lacking from the entity relationship models. So you can see from the diagram there, which is actually one of the simpler ones, there's extremely comprehensive modelings for all the types of things that can happen to a serial. If you're at all interested in serials, I definitely recommend having a look at it. It's super interesting. And it definitely draws out the notion of the aliveness of serials, which I think Ed Jones's book, his newest book, the section on how serials are organic, particularly kind of relates to this. He uses extremely flowery language, which I love. But yeah, so if we've got then principles which influence models, finally we would have rules. So rules are probably what we think about when we think about standards generally, probably what most people think about. The current rules we have, RDA and ISPD, can be traced back to the 91 rules from 1841. So these were constructed by many people, but predominantly by a man called Nisi, who was the head of the library at the British Museum at the time. And he said that his motivation was that he wanted a poor student to have the same means of indulging his learned curiosity, following his rational pursuits, consulting the same authorities, of fathoming the most intricate inquiry as the richest man in the kingdom, as far as books go, which I think was a nice sentiment. And so that was his motivation for a lot of his work, but particularly the creation of this catalogue. So yeah, this catalogue was a catalogue which was preceded by 91 rules for its construction. They're a mixture of kind of what we might call now string encoding schemes, so like how to structure the forms, headings, punctuation to use, what elements to record, and kind of a mixture of different sort of levels as we might understand it now in terms of like work, manifestation, etc. But also they're interested in linking and cross-referencing. So yeah, in terms of periodicals, the way in which serials and periodicals were constructed was based on geography. So to find out what the library held in relation to, yes, a serial publication, you had to know kind of the geography of where it was published, or it was in relation to the corporate body that issued it. And so, yeah, that's a very, very brief overview of some standards, but I just wanted to close with a critique of the 91 rules when they were first written. In The Spectator, somebody wrote, what the public requires in the first instance, at least, is simply a practical catalogue having the title or author's name placed in alphabetical order, and not a catalogue formed upon so obtuse a plan as to require 91 rules for its construction. So yeah, there's always been haters. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. That was a great introduction. So as we mentioned, we'll take questions at the end. So please do pop those in the chat if you have any questions. And then I'll hand over to Anastasia when you're ready.
Hello. I think Ben is still sharing. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I hope you can all see that okay.
Yeah, we can.
Great. My name is Anastasia Karameus. I work at the British Film Institute, and I am the acquisitions and metadata librarian currently, but I have been the serials and e-resources librarian there in my previous role. So what I wanted to present to you today was RDA standard time, or is it? That's up to you to decide. I would like to, if I can get this to work. Okay. Give you an overview. So adapting and adopting is my bit of saying it's important to change. So everything that Ben has talked about, we should adapt and adopt new ways. And it's nothing new. It's what's been happening. RDA is here to stay. It used to be called original, but now it's official. Official RDA. Here we go. New concepts. Now, I want to curb your enthusiasm. I will not be explaining everything to do with serials in a 10-minute presentation, but I will briefly touch on them. And I would also like to, again, briefly touch on current implementations of official RDA, because there are a few and they're quite exciting. And I'd like to finish with the I. That's not the newspaper. That is the you and me of this serials cataloging world. So adapting and adopting. So we're used to databases and all those things. What's happening today is nothing new. As Ben has shown, we've been adapting to changes depending on what the surroundings are like. So from manuscript catalogs to cards and so on. And we've adopted new standards as time has gone by. And it's probably been just as painful as things are now for us. But this time around, what's changed is that we are trying to embrace the changes brought by the semantic web. And official RDA has been designed to help us do that. So a change of mindset. I don't know when people here on this call have done their studies. Mine were quite a long time ago. So I have had to change my mindset throughout my career. I have been working in this field for 35 years. So semantic web obviously means linked data. So we have to familiarize ourselves with that. We now speak of object-oriented, entity relationship, conceptual models. We use graphs to visualize the models. We have to break away from thinking of catalog records, more of data. We have to become familiar with the various acronyms, and there's lots of them. You've got your LOD, XML, XSLT, OWL, RDF, RDA, of course, ISBD, M, BibFrame, and so on. In some cases, we actually have to use these, but it seems like we need to learn a new language before we can even get to cataloging. Resources, well, some of us have resources, others do not, to invest the time to learn all these things, but I would say it's very important to do so. There is a plethora of resources out there on the web, and I think it's really important to give time to learn and adapt. And in terms of resources from organizations, the national libraries in adopting official RDA are actually spearheading, but that shouldn't actually stop the smaller ones, the lesser ones, smaller libraries, or even individuals who want to adapt and adopt to this new standard. And why? That's your reasons. Well, we are trusted as a profession, and I think one of the reasons we're trusted is because we adopt standards. We are seen to be reliable, and for our own sake, as funding goes down, of course, we need to be able to collaborate better. And I think we are now in an age of collaboration, so I think this is a perfect time to really engage. And that is our responsibility. The challenges that we have today is that the speed of change is quite fast, and the future is relatively unpredictable. I wasn't going to mention it, but AI, anyone? So we all have a responsibility to consider our needs and the needs of our users, be willing to stay informed and engaged, and we need to do that to bring about necessary changes to serve our users well. So that is the one thing that hasn't changed throughout. That's the sort of constant. So in terms of the new concepts, I will slightly repeat what Ben has said. So original RDA was modeled on the Ferber, Farad, and Farsad models. That's how I could name them. So official RDA is modeled on the IFLA LRM, and the entity relationship graph, which is pictured here, is from the LRM. So that is the basis, really, which you should be familiar with. And you now have entities, elements, relationships, attributes, vocabulary, encoding schemes, and the rest. There's a lot to take in. The entities are now in a superclass and subclass. So specifically, if you're looking at agent, you have the person and collective agent, and then collective agent goes down to another subclass. And then following the redesign of the toolkit, I don't know how many of you are using the original, but after the redesign, we can't point to numbered sections anymore for guidance. You have to navigate through each individual entity and element and the definitions, conditions, and the options. There are ways that you can link through, but it's not a printed book. So to adopt official RDA, you need really to have an application profile. You need to consider the implementation scenarios that you want to use. So basically what data you want to use to describe your collections, your resources, and which ways you want to describe them in. We also have to embrace new terms. So serials, is it a serial? Is it a diachronic work? And you have to understand certain concepts which have changed with official RDA. So there was a lot of work that went into aggregates, aggregating works, and that's affected the thinking around diachronic works, which has fed into the WeLock, which is for aggregates, and eventually the WEMLock for serials, which you may or may not like, but that's another matter. We talk of transformations. So the changes because of the WEMLock, where if a serial has significant changes, say in its title, you would create a new record. So transformations happen at work level. I'm going very briefly over all of this, but what I'm hoping to do is at the Q&A afterwards, we can go into more details. So transformations have been introduced, and then the work group has been introduced to give the sort of overall for the serial at the top level to bring them all together. So Presu. Oh, sorry, I was going to say, I do apologize, or do I? Because diachronic has actually come from the Greek, but I don't think you can blame the Greeks because I don't think we were the ones that decided to use the word. However, it is something that lasts throughout time. So to move on. The RDA toolkit is a new language, and the sections on the left, I would suggest, if you're not familiar with the toolkit and its language, that you go through these sections in order. So you start with the guidance and then look through the entities and the elements that apply to those entities. And then you look at the policies that other libraries have created so far, which are there for obviously their own catalogers, but are also a useful guide to the rest of us. So the British Library has created policies already. And the resources include the glossary, which again is a very useful tool in trying to understand the language of RDA. But if you want to an initial dip in, if you haven't already, which I'm sure most of you have, I would really, really recommend you use the RDA Toolkit's YouTube channel, because there are some great resources on there already that explain everything pretty much. And what they don't explain, I think we need to ask for explanations for. So this is my choice of slide, my choice of image from Pursue. I'm afraid I didn't go for the simpler one because in our library we do original cataloging and we catalog to issue level, and we also catalog down to the articles. So we do indexing. So we have been trying to grapple with the more sort of complicated side of serials and how you express that in RDA. So I'm happy to discuss any of that later. But what I will say is that, as Ben has mentioned, Ed Jones' book on serials cataloging in RDA is amazing. The first edition is was based on original RDA. So if you're using Mark, then it was closely linked to RDA and how you use it. Shows in Mark how it works with Mark. If you are looking to implement or are interested in official RDA, then his second edition has just come out. And I cannot really praise him enough for his very clear guidance. And he really has an engaging writing style. Serials are alive, and RDA is actually alive, which is why it's online and in that format online, because it is changing and it will continue to change. But I'm very happy to openly advertise Jones's books here, and I would suggest that they're both worth having. On final show of new concepts, I just wanted to show very quickly, we now have ISBD for manifestation. So ISBD has been kind of aligned and brought up to date to align with RDA, official RDA. So the example here is of a diachronic work. As you can see on the right, it gives you a little explanation. And this is the same diachronic work, but it's the issue record. And as you can see, it embodies a static work. So static works and diachronic works are, again, something we can discuss in the Q&A. But that's the major difference in official RDA. And I put this slide in just to show you the the broader and narrow elements, in this case for publisher and the collective agent. So applications. The reasoning behind RDA is the international aspect of it. So moving away from something that's Anglo-American to having something that's international. And if you're wondering about the picture, it's because of the how do you do in My Fair Lady. So that's that. There are a number of applications which we are aware of currently, or that I'm aware of currently, which I just want to quickly zip through. I'm aware of time as well. RDA is a common language. It's being, the official toolkit is being translated into other languages, has been already and is as we speak. But it's also a common language in the sense of internationally, it's being revised internationally. It grows by international conversations and the needs of all communities internationally, not just the sort of Anglo-American push. So, Library of Congress, obviously, CONSA has a lot of influence in the States, but it's also a great place to look for guidance. BL, sorry, I should say the Library of Congress is in the middle of a rolling implementation, so they've said it's going to take a certain number of years to implement. The British Library, which is this slide here, we're going to have completed, but they were halted by the cyber attack, unfortunately. There is an implementation in Germany. It's actually the German-speaking countries in Europe. So, and they've called it RDA DACH, the D standing for Deutschland, A is for Austria, and CH is for Switzerland. I would really recommend having a look at all of these in more detail. Then you have the Swedish application. They have gone, they've embraced the full sort of linked data approach, and they're using BibFrame. You also have New Zealand. And again, their implementation has been slightly different. They're actually using the toolkit and putting everything through the toolkit. And most recently, we've had presentations from the National Library of Greece, who are a small team with big ambitions. And they've managed to get RDA back on the educational cataloging map. So to finish with, I just wanted to quickly speak of the I, and that is to say that it is important to adopt a standard for the reasons of collaboration, resources, and our own sanity of mind, if we're honest. But throughout that, it's important to first consider your needs. So the adoption of, say, official RDA will depend very much on who your users are, what resources you wish to describe, what resources you have to catalog them. And then considering the standards is not just a case of considering whether you will continue to use AACR2 or original RDA or move to official RDA. It's also, will you consider to use MARC? Will you move on to BibFrame? Will you go for the more linked data approach or plan for it in the future? And again, that is ruled by the appetite of your organization, but also the audience, your audience. So you have to consider which of these fit your purposes. And I would say it's important that everyone is engaged because these standards are not static. They are constantly changing. We don't have to wait a number of years before we can make changes and then print a published book. There are quarterly meetings happening at which new proposals are considered and then implemented. So please be an active participant. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So again, if you have any questions for Anastasia, please do put them in the chat and we'll come back to them in the Q&A part of the session. And now I'll pass on to Richard, if you're ready, Richard.
Right, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Good. Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Brown. I'm a serials cataloguer at the British Library, based not in London, but at Boston Spa in Yorkshire. So this is just a brief overview of the standards that we use at the British Library. Obviously, we're the National Library, so we lead on the development of cataloguing standards in the UK. Presentation doesn't really touch on metadata. It's more about the application of standards. basically the how and the why of how we use standards in our everyday work with serials at the library. So these are the 5 main standards that we use for mainstream material, which in our case is mainly print serials, but also some electronic, mainly online journals. Other departments in the library deal with more specialist materials, things such as manuscripts do use different standards, but the bulk of the cataloguing with serials, we use these 5. Mark 21, ISSN, obviously the British Library is also the national centre for ISSN, so I'll be talking a bit more about that. The 2 subject classifications we use, which currently are FAST and Dewey Decimal, and of course finishing with RDA and what we're up to with that. So Mark 21 has been the British Library's cataloguing format since 2004, when we got our integrated library system. It's a widely used global format. It succeeded UK Mark in the UK, and it is a global format. It unified various national formats which previously existed, of which UK Mark was just one. It has advantages for interoperability and record sharing, which is increasingly important, obviously, in the digital age. And the British Library is one of the key members of the Mark 21 community, working alongside primarily the Library of Congress and the National Library of Canada. So for full level records, these are created in all cases where issues of accession titles have been examined by the cataloguer, and they include full subject indexing and classification. And these standard records can be identified by the presence in the 042 field of the code UK BLSR. Also produce a lot of ISSN only records in cases of items which have yet to be accessioned or are not going to be retained. They're catalogued to a minimal level without subject indexing or classification. And completed ISSN records, which are also made available on the ISSN portal, have ISSN UK as their identifier in the 042 field. Just an example of a recently catalogued serials record, full level record. You can see in the 042 UK BLSR and ISSN UK identifiers, and it's also got an ISSN in the 022 field with the corresponding key title in the 222. So moving on to ISSN, International Standard Serial Number. It's a unique numeric identifier linked to the title of an individual periodical publication. So what exactly is it? Why do we use it? Well, it's a bibliographic tool used in searching, library management, interlibrary loans, and distribution. They're the main uses of it, but libraries also use it in a variety of ways. ISSN began in 1976, and since then over 2.5 million numbers have been assigned worldwide. The national assigning agencies are linked to national libraries, and they're all coordinated by the International Centre, which is based in Paris. The ISSN is an 8-digit code divided by a hyphen into 2 4-digit numbers. And the substantive number is the first 7 digits, the final digit is a check number, and each number represents a unique key title. Unlike ISBN, which are applied to books, ISSN numbers are anonymous and they don't contain publication data embedded in the number. And they're assigned sequentially with the, like I said, the 8th digit being a check number. So FAST, we've only relatively recently started using FAST. It replaced LCSH for most material that the library deals with from November 2022. It organises headings into distinct categories or facets. Its flexibility offers improved user experience in terms of search and discovery. It's easier to process, ensuring metadata consistency. And increasingly important, again, greater interoperability for shared records. And last but certainly not least from our point of view, it's simpler to apply and it makes the cataloguing process more efficient. DDC or Dewey Decimal Classification, I'm sure all librarians will have heard of this. It's a numeric system which classifies by subject according to a prescribed hierarchy. And it's added to all full-level serial records created by the BL. Supports search and discovery, and it's especially useful for browsing. The numbers assigned to serials tend to be less specific, but that broader classification means that DDC is especially useful for serials collection management, and we use it to gain a broad overview of our serials collections and to make decisions regarding selection. And finally, RDA, resource description and access. So RDA replaced AACR as the BL cataloguing standard in April 2013. And the library leads on developing and maintaining the standard in the UK in cooperation with CIVIT. It's comprehensive, flexible and adaptable to multiple formats. We've heard earlier about the entity relationship model, which improves metadata management and linked data. It's also more analytical, more granular, and helps you to sort of drill down through various manifestations of a work. It's user-centered and designed to support different needs and contexts. So for BL's implementation of official RDA, last year we formulated our policy on the new toolkit. Things, as we mentioned earlier, have been a bit delayed because of the cyber attack at the end of 2023. Then application profiles were integrated with documentation through a new cataloging hub. And user acceptance testing, which I was involved with along with 2 other members of the team, was carried out in February and March of this year. Staff training of the new RDA began last month, and the transition to official RDA for the British Library is scheduled to be from May of next year. So that's about it.
So much, Richard. Okay, 3 fantastic presentations. What we're going to do now is stop the recording and then we can start to take some questions. So let me just